Proverbs 13. That's a good problem. Not a good problem to not be used to. Not having kids. Is that complicated enough? You know how many congregations don't have classes normally? So something that we hope we never become accustomed to, right? All right. Proverbs 13, we'll start in verse 15 here. We'll look at verses 15 and 16 together. It says, good understanding gains favor, but the way of the unfaithful is hard. Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool lays open his folly. And so we look at this, and what would we say the theme of these scriptures are? We put these two together. Good understanding gains favor, but the way of the unfaithful is hard. Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool lays open his folly. If you take the beginning of 15 and talk about gains favor, and then the end of 16, but a fool lays open his folly, we could say that you will be known, right? What's the difference between the two characters or two characteristics of the individuals that are being talked about? What they're known for, right? Is everybody else as tired as I am? Okay. I'll try to do something to keep myself and you awake. Anyway, we are known for something, aren't we? All of us. You know, a lot of people say, well, I just kind of slip away in the shadows and nobody notices me. You know, I live down at the end of the street. I keep all my blinds shut and I don't come out. And what do people know about you? That's the hermit that lives down the street. You're going to be known for something, right? Okay. So when you look at this, we're going to be known for something. Yes.
We had a preacher in Momingo that they kept their blinds shut and they stayed, you never seen them.
Never saw him? Yeah.
And he was a preacher,
Yeah. Hard to let your light shine when you don't have any interaction with people.
Some people in town said, what's with the preacher? We never see him. They keep their blinds shut and everything.
Yeah. Well, when Christians go home and lock themselves in their home, and the only time they come out is to go to services and back again, you know, how can we be an influence? Yeah. So anyway, we think about that. So good understanding gains favor. Favor with who? People you have contact with, right, on the outside. But the way of the unfaithful is hard or difficult. Okay, we're paving our way in our life to have difficulty. He says, but a prudent man acts with knowledge, but the fool lays open his folly. And so the idea that we're talking about here in these verses is we gain favor through our righteousness, don't we? And so in Luke 2 and verse 52, I think we've looked at other times with this study, but here in this verse, who's it talking about in Luke 2? Anybody remember? This was engraven in heavenly truths, one of our memory verses. Somebody read that when you get there, or quote it when you realize what it is. Luke 2:52. Okay, so we look at this. He increased in stature. He was growing and developing as a human. But what was he also doing? He was gaining what? Wisdom and favor. There's the word. All those are right answers. What we're looking at for these verses was favor. With who? Who's it say in the verse? Favor with people. With God, that's right. But with people. Did Jesus have contact with the world? People in the world? Yeah, absolutely. Or else he wouldn't have been able to gain appreciation by those around him. Okay? favor from them. So we look at this, and we see in verse 15, a good understanding gains favor, right? What are we talking about? Wisdom gains favor. But the way of the faithful is hard. And we look at people and say they have a hard life. Why? Because the life they have chose to live outside of wisdom. Every prudent man acts with what? Knowledge. You say, why did you do that? You say, do what? You know, most of the time we have a reason for what we do. And as Christians, what we do, we need to have wisdom behind those reasons, don't we? We need to say, well, I did it because of these reasons, you know, with the goals in mind. So, but a fool lays open his folly. If we're going to live a foolish lifestyle, people are going to know about it, aren't they? So we need to make choices. All right, so what sections would you want to place these under for your studies? How about section 8? I put under section 8, the nature of God, because God acts with what? Knowledge, doesn't he? His ultimate wisdom. And then I also put section 26 under a section of righteousness, and 29 judgment. Why did I put that? To gain favor. Is that a judgment call people are going to make? So let's give them a reason to like us for the right reasons. Any questions or comments about this? Okay. Let's look at verse 17. It says, a wicked messenger falls into trouble, but a faithful ambassador brings health. What would be the errors of a wicked messenger? What's a messenger? Somebody delivers a message. Well, here you go. We're using the word to define. What are we doing? We're relaying information, aren't we? Relaying. How are some ways to be a wicked messenger?
Deceitful.
Being deceitful.
Not lying.
Not telling the truth. Yeah, lying. Deceitful, not telling the truth, and lying. I think we're all on the same page there. Okay, those are some ways. Or not relaying the message, right? Giving a partial truth, not following through. So we talk about these things. But a faithful ambassador brings health. What's an ambassador's job?
Keep the lines of communication open.
Keep the lines of communication. Okay. A lot of times they're a delegate for someone, right? And so an ambassador goes and makes agreements and things. And those agreements need to be based upon what? Proper knowledge, right? Knowing the situation, to urge the other parties to act based upon what's good for the situation. And so a wicked messenger falls into trouble, but a faithful ambassador brings health, protection, or safety is the idea here. And so what are some sections of Scripture this might fall under? I put under 1, wisdom. Okay? When you say, well, that's pretty simple. But also 24, the words of the wise here. And so our messages need to be true, and we need to be faithful ambassadors because we're going to bring health. When we take the message of the gospel, does that bring health and benefit to the world? Yeah, the truth always helps. Okay, section 19. I've missed one. 18. Kathy's not here to keep me on track tonight. Poverty and shame will come to him who disdains correction, but he who regards rebuke will be honored. What's another word for correction? Instruction. Yeah. The one that I was applying here was discipline, right? And a lot of times we talk about discipline, especially in today's society. Is discipline something that's looked at as being positive?
Is there discipline?
What's that?
I think it's a better question. Is
Is there
there discipline?
discipline? If you were to get up at 4 a.m. every morning and go to the gym for an hour before you started your day, or as you started your day, Daryl's looking at me, would people consider you being a disciplined individual?
Yes.
Yeah. And so when we think about discipline, what's the design of discipline? To go ahead.
Become better or improve, but
Be-
it's not
Yeah.
perceived that way usually.
It's not perceived, right? And so what we're trying to do is set forth the proper path and stay on it, okay? The idea of being disciplined. And so when you think about discipline, now you think about 4 a.m. at the gym. No, that's what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a driven mindset, right? When we thought about the discipline of a children, who is driving the mindset?
Well, it's supposed to be the parents.
It should be the parents, right? That's the idea, okay? So poverty and shame will come to him who dislikes, stays away from what? Instruction, correction, discipline, okay? But he who regards rebuke will be what? Be honored, okay? We think about men like Job who sat at the gates of the city. Were they men of discipline? Have you ever thought about Job as being a disciplined individual? We're not necessarily, I'm sure that his parents helped to shape him in that, but he maintained the discipline in his life that caused him to have the great success that he did, right? And because of that, he's honored, okay? And when you think about the poverty and shame, was Job a poor individual? No. Was he an individual that should be ashamed of his lifestyle? No. Why? Because of his righteousness, correction, discipline. Okay, he's one that when his friends came, and here we won't go through all Job, but a lot of us are pretty familiar with Job. When his friends came, did he tell them, say, go away, I don't want to listen to you? He sat and listened to what they had to say. Now, as we study it here several thousand years later, we understand that his friends were what? Not supportive and way off base, weren't they? In what they believed happened. But he was at least willing to sit down and listen and weigh what they were saying. Okay? And so he was listening for those that may have the right correction for him. And so, but he who regards rebuke will be honored. I think that's a picture of Job here in verse 18. So what sections might this apply to? 12, I put under section 12, poverty and wealth, and because it's talked about in the verse. And also section 29 here, judgment. Okay, we're going to be judged, aren't we? All of us. So if we judge ourselves first, are we going to be better off? Yeah, we've got to be willing to take correction now rather than later. Okay. Any other questions or comments about this verse? Okay. Let's go on to verse 19 now, finally. Here we see, a desire accomplished is sweet to the soul, but it is an abomination to fools to depart from evil. And so we look at this, kind of connects back to 18 in thought. A desire accomplished is sweet to the soul. What are we talking about, a desire accomplished?
Job done.
Okay, a job completed or a job done is good, is sweet to the soul, but it is an abomination to fools to do what? What is an abomination? I think this is interesting in this verse as we look at the words. What is an abomination? Sin. A lot of times when we talk about abominations, we're talking about sin when we're talking about the Bible. And so when we think about sin as a Christian, it's something that we stay away from. And so again, I thought about Job. What was Job described as we're introduced to him in chapter 1? Job was that did what to evil? He shewed evil. That's the King James that yeah. No, that's right. That's the word that's in my mind, right? What's the word in the New King James? Isn't it shunned evil? Right? But he shewed evil as far as he pushed himself away from it. Okay, as you think about that, it says, a desire accomplished is sweet to the soul, but it is an abomination to a fool for him to do what? Yeah. And so Tyler brought up, in the mindset, or the idea here, the thought is, for us, we say a sin is something that we abhor, that we eschew, that we abstain from, that we avoid, okay, to go around. We see that from Psalm chapter 1, talking about the not to walk in the way of sinners. Drawing a blank. Help me out. Psalm 1:1. Okay, but the idea here is that individual, for them to stop doing that, is the same impulse as a Christian has about sin. For them to stop sinning, they feel the same way about to stop sinning as we feel about sinning. They have a love for it. Okay, as if it would be wrong for them to stop doing that. And so a desire accomplished is sweet to the soul. And so when you look at this, and you can look at some things, I read different information trying to make sure I understood the beginning of verse 19. There's great satisfaction in accomplishing things, right? Being active. Okay, so the question is that what we're talking about? Or the desire here, is it talking about something we would lust after? It being sweet to the soul. Okay, both apply. So look into that more for yourself. But we know the second part, a person who wants to do wrong things, a foolish individual, it's an abomination for them to stop doing the wrong thing. And so you think about those that lived in Noah's time prior to the flood. It was who they were to sin. Okay? All right. Sections might fall under section 12. Section 12. Poverty. Am I looking at the right? Nope, I'm not looking at the right. 27, that's where I put it. 27, joy in a fulfilled life. Forgot to say something about verse 18 that I had wrote down here. Poverty and shame will come to him who disdains correction, but he who regards rebuke will be honored. I thought about this. Chain gangs. You ever heard of a chain gang? I remember seeing some information when I was younger, the controversy about some of the states that had chain gangs or wanted to start chain gangs. And some of the problems with the chain gangs that I remember being talked about as people that were for it and against it was, it would be an insult and a disgrace, a humiliation for the individual on the chain gang. Would you agree or disagree?
Might be, but it's a good teaching tool.
But that's the thing. That's what discipline is, right? Okay. If you can't discipline yourself, someone else needs to discipline you. And if it takes us to feel ashamed about our decisions to quit doing that, that's really a good thing, isn't it? Okay. All right. Sorry to go back. All right. So verse 20. Go to verse 20. He who walks with a wise man will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed. A saying that I learned when I was young and I remember is birds of a feather do what? Flock together. And so a good man leaves, or no, he who walks with wise men will be what? Why? Because they're going to rub off on one another. They're going to grow with one another. They're going to develop with one another. That's the idea. But the companion of fools will be what? Destroyed. You know, Eric and I, we had the opportunity to have a nice visit with some guys last week. And one of the things we talked about is you may not be able to have the same friends and family you have now. You know, because, you know, several of the guys that we were visiting with, you know, they're like, we've been good friends. It's like, well, if you can be good friends and do the right thing, that would be all right. But if you can be good friends and not do the right things, maybe you can't be friends with one another. And so that's a principle we see here. And so it goes both ways, doesn't it? 1 Corinthians 15:33, evil companionship does what? Corrupts good manners, good morals. That's the opposite. So this one says, wise men will do what? Build each other up. 1 Corinthians 15, what do we see? Evil companionship will do what? Bring us down. All right? It's our choice who we want to associate with and who we want to become. Okay? Where do you want to put this in your notes? Friendships, 16 maybe, right? Choose our friends wisely and choose wise friends. All right, let's go on to verse 21. It says, evil pursues sinners, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. That word evil sometimes can be translated the idea of difficulty. Difficulty pursues sinners, right? Sometimes we hear people say they are choosing the hard road. Guess what? Sin is the hard road, isn't it? It's always going to be the hard road. It's been the hard road from the beginning. If we went back to Genesis 3 and say about Adam and Eve, what was their life like before and after sin? Before sin, it was wonderful. Can it still be wonderful after? Yeah, because of Christ and redemption and things like that. The grace of God, lots of things like that. But it was far better where? Before the sin. Okay? And so when we look at this, evil pursues us sinners. Once we start down that road, what's going to continue to happen? Yeah, think about those movies where the people have to travel and they look down this dark wooded area, and the movie revolves around one thing that happens after another. Some of the old Disney movies are that way. And then you say, if you're going to go down that road, of course when you're watching the movie, you say, I've seen this before. You know it's going to be one bad thing after another. Well, life's the same way. As if we could draw a picture of if we're going to choose a righteous life or sinful life. There's a lot of uphill battles as a Christian. But it's not the same things that are out to get us. So anyway, verse 21, maybe we should put this under section 5, talking about the human heart. What's going to come? A broken spirit, right? Who we become and our mindset on life is a lot of times based upon our decisions we make. So we need to think about that. So we asked the question, what are the consequences of sin? And so there's 3 things that I thought of as we thought about this verse. There's physical consequences, emotional consequences, and spiritual consequences. Aren't there? Anyway, maybe have another classification. All right, 22, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinners is stored up for the righteous. 22 is an interesting proverb to me. That tells us our grandparents have to leave us an inheritance if they're good. No. What's going to happen is we go back and we look at all these verses that we've talked about. Wisdom causes what? Prosperity, doesn't it? When you think about Job, was Job being paid to be righteous? No. But righteousness doesn't do anything but do what? Make everything better. Okay? When we study about the nation of Israel, when they are righteous, were they wealthy? Why? Because God blessed them. And we say because that's the way God set things up to work. Okay? And so that's the way things have worked from the beginning. Adam and Eve in the garden, were they wealthy? They had everything. They were being taken care of. Okay? They lost that. So a good man leaves an inheritance to his children. A good man is going to have abundance. Okay? And be able to be generous. What's that?
So I think more of this on the spiritual side. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, that applies too. But the wealth of a sinner is stored up for the righteous. You think about that. I wrote here vices. What's a vice? Something you can't do without. Okay. And when you think about vices, most vices are what? Well, really they are sinful and something we put in as such a priority in our life. And so we can't be addicted to those things and have anything left over, can we? So that's a good principle too of the spiritual side. I didn't think about that.
Well, wealth's not promised to the righteous today. So
Not promised to.
no, because I mean there's plenty of righteous people that are poor,
Mm-hmm.
struggled their whole life. So I mean the application for them definitely was because the Old Testament God told them, if you are righteous, you will be blessed physically.
Yeah.
But for us, it's different, spiritual.
Yeah.
So the application I think would be spiritual for us.
We think about also, wealth. Jesus never owned really anything, but did he ever go without?
He didn't go without, but can't remember which disciple said they would follow him, and he said, the Son of Man didn't even have a place to lay his head.
Doesn't even have a place to lay his head. Yeah.
We look at that on the, as far as the one that, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. If we're wise and we use the word the way it should, we'll be able to look out into the world and see what people that are doing it wrong, use that to reinforce why we do what we do.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. So a just man blesses generations to come. And I thought about Abraham. How many generations did his blessing continue to? How about today? And so as Tara said, the spiritual, right? God blessed him physically, but the spiritual blessing continues to what? Go on and on and on. How many in this room had grandparents that were Christians that kept going? It continues on. So I put it under section 28 in my notes. Section 28 is salvation in God means deliverance. That's something we can pass on. I also put it under 18, home life, right? The home life. And so what kind of people are we that's developing the generations to come? All right, any questions or comments? All right, 23 says, much food is in the fallow ground of the poor, and for lack of justice there is waste. And this is a verse that really stumped me, and I read it over and over again, tried to find some insight in it. The industry of the poor righteous will yield much, is what I put in my notes. And so Israel always had the same land, didn't they? And that's what some commentators link the idea back to, is the Israelites always had the same land. And at certain times, if they'd sell the land, they had the opportunity to do what? To buy it back, okay, to get it back. And so the wealth, and so it says much food is in the fallow ground of the poor. And so that individual, that ground will continue to do what? Produce and produce and produce. It has lots of potential. Sometimes we don't see the potential that ground has, and sometimes that potential is not realized today. And so when you look at that, sometimes we don't see the blessings that are there right now, right? But if we do, if we keep plowing the ground and planting the ground and cultivating the ground, it's going to continue to produce and produce, and that poor individual will always be taken care of. And for lack of justice, there is waste. And like I said, I spent a lot of time. I'd encourage you to study it some more. There's different ideas on what this means for sure. But several commentators I read linked it back to the Israelites, and they would just keep cultivating the land, and God provided for them through that. I put this, where did I put this? I didn't write it down on my notes here. Where I put this under, I don't know where I put it under. I didn't write it on my cheat sheet. Anyway, let's talk about that. Where would we put it? Maybe poverty and wealth, 12. The nature of God providing for his people, section 8. God did for his nation, if that's what he's talking about in section 22. All right, let's look at section 24. It says, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. And so when we think about this, what's a rod for? Attitude. It's a symbol of what? Discipline. That's a symbol of discipline. Okay. And so it's not only discipline but authority, right? A symbol of authority. So he who spares his rod hates his son. And so what would the rod represent? Discipline. The use of the authority over the individual. Hates his son. Why would you hate your son?
If you love them, you're going to want what's best for them, and that's for them to be a good individual who
That's right.
is saved. And they won't be that way naturally if you just leave them to their own devices, because kids push limits, that's what they do.
That's what they do. So, but he who loves him disciplines him how?
Promptly.
Okay, promptly. And so the idea is we have responsibility to do what? Raise our children. What are we raising our children to be? Christians. What's Terry say? Servants. Okay. Faithful, righteous. We could put a lot of words in here. And so if we want to see our children be successful, what are we going to do? Yeah. So we talked about, for illustration, the individual that's at the gym at 4 a.m., which is not me, just so you know, in case you were wondering. It's not me. But the idea is eventually, our children, when they get up for school, who gets them up for school? Mom, right? Our parent gets them up. Over time, the idea is that responsibility is passed from the parent on to who? Okay. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop our children's discipline, aren't we? But for them to develop discipline, what do we have to do? Show them.
You not only have to do it for them, but you have to lay the groundwork, show them clearly exactly what you expect. Dad always said, assume they know nothing.
Assume they know.
Assume we're complete idiots, and lay it out for them step by step and show them what you expect, because they can't read your mind.
Yeah.
I've been guilty of that, but
Yeah.
they can't read your mind.
Yeah. Well, when they're born, they don't know anything. God gave us a blank slate, right? So that's the idea. And so we've got to do the right thing to steer our children in the right direction. Sections this might fall under is 21, parents and children, 18, our home life, and I also put under 7, which is what? You say, wait a second, we're talking about parents disciplining children. What's the design? To develop their self-control. Okay. Verse 25 says, righteousness eats to the satisfying of the soul, the righteous eats to the satisfying of his soul, but the stomach of the wicked shall be in want. What are we talking about here? Always seeking, okay. Each to the satisfying of the soul.
They're always seeking more righteousness and doing what's right, but those that are wicked.
Yeah. Are we talking about a buffet here?
The ESV
We know not.
translates it, the righteous has enough to satisfy his appetite, but the belly of the wicked suffers want. So to me, that implies hard work and planning on your part and preparation so that you have what you need.
Contentment, right? The idea of contentment. Okay. So when we think about that, was Paul satisfied? Yeah, but he also what? He didn't quit. Okay. And so here, we talk about jealousy, envy, covetousness, all these ideas. And that's a lot of the things that cause the wicked to be who they are. Isn't that the case? And so when we think about contentment, satisfaction, so I put section 27, a fulfilled life. The righteous eats to the satisfying of his what? Soul. Versus the wicked are gluttonous in their attitude towards things, right? What are they? And I think that's what Tara was saying a minute ago. What are they doing? More, me, a self-centered life, a self-focused life. And so when you look at section 17, generosity and greed, and maybe that doesn't fall exactly, but their greed is to do what? What's that?
I was gonna give an example of that kind of thing.
Of greed? No.
Solomon, whenever we look at his life, he started out, he had everything, and he sought to fill the void with physical things.
That's right.
And it was never satisfying. He always needed more, he always needed more. But by the time he got done with it, he said, all of his family, the whole of man is to fear God and keep his commandments.
Keep his commandments. So here's the thing. You think about that, and I think this goes back to, and sometimes I feel like a broken record between Adam and Eve and Job. But Adam and Eve, okay, the righteous eats to the satisfying of their soul. What did Adam and Eve need in the garden? Nothing, okay. But the stomach of the wicked shall be in want. What did Adam and Eve want? When you look at, as the fruit is described in Genesis 3, it tells us that Eve saw that it was pleasant to the eyes, that it was good for food. Was the garden beautiful? From the descriptions we have, the garden was already beautiful. Okay. Did they have food in the garden? How much food? As much as they needed, or probably as much as they wanted, right? Okay. And then it also tells us that they would become like, to make one wise like gods, right? To know, to be able to discern between good and evil. And so the stomach of the wicked shall be what? In want. God gave them everything they ever needed. And what got them kicked out of the garden? Their desire to have more. Okay. All right, so sections that this might fall under is 27 for me, and maybe greed under section 17. That's where we'll end up. Any questions or comments?
You could, the way I look at it is Matthew 6:33.
Yeah.
God
Matthew
takes care of
6.
the righteous, the wicked doesn't.
Yeah, that's right. All right, any questions or comments? All right, thank you.